So nice to meet you, Daniel. Thank you for taking the time to chat about this film, Key of Genius. It tells the story of a blind, autistic kid who plays piano wonderfully, and it also happens to be the Queen of England's nephew. So there's a lot being said about patience, perseverance. What personally drew you to that story?
So I come from a family of classical musicians. I myself have been playing the violin since I was 5. I still play in the Santa Monica Symphony and a couple other groups around LA. And so my mom, who is a professional violinist, she sends me these little music videos once in a while of musicians and things. And so she sent me this 5-minute clip, which was taken from the 60 Minutes program about Derek Paravicini. Now he's an adult, he's in his 40s. And here's a guy who can play any piece of music he's ever heard in his life. He can play it in any key, in any style. He can improvise. And I'm watching this, and I'm like, this isn't real. This is AI, right? This is like a made up thing. It's not a true person. But I dug into the story a little bit more, found out in fact he is a real person, and that his lifelong music teacher Adam Ockleford had written a wonderful book about their experiences, particularly when Derek was a child, of he was a boy who was certainly born with musical gifts, but he also was, very neurodivergent and didn't learn in the typical way. And so Adam had to figure out how to communicate with him, how to break through with him. And there's a lot in there about music almost being like the language and the bridge that he used to get through to this boy, and the way that this boy communicated with him. And for me as a musician, that really, really resonated. And I thought, wow, what a wonderful story and theme revolving around music. So it tapped into my musicianship.
Yeah, it's a beautiful story, and there's something to be said about the power of music and art in general. So do you think it's crucial to teach younger kids the importance of art and the impact it can have on our life, whether we're in a difficult situation, or if you're having trouble, if you're depressed? Do you think, like, what do you feel about the importance of art in our life in general?
I mean, it's everything, right? It's expression, it's emotion. I think it's also really important from like a discipline perspective with kids. Like playing a sport, for example. I think the way you make progress is incrementally. It's like you practice a little every day. You're not going to become a concert pianist or musician overnight, but if you chip away at it every single day, you will gradually get better. And that's such a important life skill that's applicable, I think, to anything.
Yeah, 100%. And unless I'm mistaken, I think there's no mention of his family heritage in the short. Was that intentional?
Yeah, that was intentional. It's one of those things where we only have 10, 12 minutes of screen time. There's only so much of a focused story that we can pack in. There's a feature version of this movie in the works, and in that one we dial much more into the family and the class disparity between the family and the teacher and all of that.
Yeah, I'm sure you did some research, on the story. For example, the way he's playing, like, you have a very specific and peculiar way of playing the piano. Also with the teacher, how he's trying to adapt. What was that process like? All the research process behind it?
It was really fun, honestly. So I had the benefit of working from Adam's incredible book, which is called In the Key of Genius, very similar title. And the detail in there was a fantastic starting point. He talks a lot about how when he first met Derek, who had never had a lesson before in his life, this boy, he played the piano with karate chops and with fists on the keys and with elbows. He was blind. He had never seen how one was supposed to play the piano, and because he had never had a lesson, nobody had ever taught him, but he had somehow figured out how to do things this way. So that was a great starting point. But of course, for me, so much of doing this right was getting to know the people it's actually based on. So in the very early part of the process, I reached out to Adam. He's a professor in London, still working with many children to this very day, still very involved with Derek as Derek tours around the world and performs. And I had the fortunate experience of being able to fly out there and meet them both in person. I brought my violin with me, and Adam had suggested that I prepare a few pieces of music to play with Derek. And so I take up my violin, and I asked Adam, do you think he knows these pieces that I've prepared? And he said, just start playing. If he's heard this piece at least once, he'll know what to do. And within like 4 notes of me playing, Derek would just join in, and seamlessly it was like a duet. It was incredible. And spending time with them really, really helped me lean into some of what I felt were the more powerful themes in this. Like that idea of music as communication, you really feel it when you're in a room with Derek. Like when he performs at the piano, he's not just playing, he's speaking to the room. And I've seen him perform for larger audiences too, and it's the same thing. It's like the keyboard is his mechanism for how he talks to the world, and you really feel that when you're with him. And that so meeting with them was very helpful. And then as I was developing the script, Adam was extremely involved and in a very helpful way. I was able to send him drafts, and he gave me great feedback and notes. And to his credit, any adaptation of a book, or in this case, a true life story, you have to change a few of the details to make it work as a film.
Yeah.
Fortunately, here I didn't actually have to change too much, but there were certainly things that I needed to do. And Adam always was supportive of those ideas as long as I stayed true to the essence of his experience with Derek.
Yeah, well, I feel like there's something very important when you tackle a subject like that to be authentic to the original story. So it's so cool that you had to spend time with them and also jamming and playing music. So
yeah,
I've seen some clip of him. He's extraordinary, like super talented. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really unbelievable. As a classical musician, the way I operate and many of the other people in the orchestras I play in, like the way we operate is, you put a piece of music in front of us and we can play it. We're trained to do that, and we can practice and we can do those things. What a jazz musician does, where they improvise, my brain explodes. I can't process that. Like, I don't know what to do. Derek somehow can do both. I've never met anybody that can do both. He both can perfectly play a piece of music that he's heard, and he can at the same time improvise on top of it. And it truly is extraordinary.
That's insane. And also, we're talking about the writing process and everything. So David Seidler has a writing credit on the short film. He won an Academy Award for The King's Speech, sadly passed away in March 2024. So what was the process of adapting the real life story, but also his credit into the short film?
Yeah, so the project started off as a feature first. So I had originally written the feature after working closely with Adam and Derek. I had gotten the rights to Adam's book, had written the script. The script was voted onto the Hollywood blacklist, if you know about that.
Okay.
And then the script was optioned by E1 Studios, which later was acquired by Lionsgate. And when we were in development with the studio, they said, "We love your script, but clearly you're American, if you could tell from my accent. I'm not. I'm not from England, despite what you may believe." And they said, it'd be great to bring on board a very high-level British writer that can bring that authenticity to the table. And listen, you never want to be rewritten as a writer, but this was a case where I felt, this is actually a good opportunity to make this more authentic. Can I have a say in who that writer might be? And they said, yeah, send us your list. I don't think they were necessarily going to take my list seriously. But David Seidler was at the top of my list, and we got him.
Nice.
And he was the perfect fit for the film. The King's Speech, for me, has always been a great inspiration for this film. In David's case with that, he was so personally connected to that story because he himself had a speech impediment growing up. Mm-hmm. And with his British parents, what they would do is they would say, hey, look at the King of England. He also has a speech impediment, and look how far he's come. And that in many ways helped David. And so that was a very personal story for him. But, he's somebody who dealt with a disability. And, it's the kind of disability where you never fully solve it. Like, it never fully goes away, much like is the case with Derek, but it's more about how do you work with that, and how do you, what's the toolkit for that? So that piece was really very helpful with David. And also his understanding of class differences in England, certainly on a much higher level than anything I could ever understand. And so in the feature, there's much more in there about, you mentioned, Derek is the nephew of Queen Camilla. And so his parents were these very rich, powerful British people with a long, long line of tradition. And into that comes Adam, who's, much more blue-collar worker from a school. And there were a lot of class differences between that, of like, what could he do? What couldn't he do? What was the proper etiquette? What was not? And David was really able to bring a lot of that to life. And I had the fortunate experience of spending a lot of time with him as he got to work rewriting the script. He, towards the end of his life, was living in Santa Fe, New Mexico. So I drove out there and met with him and got to work with him. And it was truly just a wonderful experience. Very sad, like you mentioned, that he passed away last year, but just an incredible, gracious human being. So
Did you have the chance to watch the short film, or?
Yes, he did watch the short film, and he was very, very thrilled with how it turned out. one of the questions we always had in the process was, how do you cast this movie? You know, Derek is a blind autistic boy. How do you do it? And I think David was very moved and pleased with the actor that we found for the role, Cannon Wood, and the performance that he gave.
Well, you're kind of reading my mind. That was my next question. Like, in terms of casting, it must have been like super challenging, especially the casting of Derek, which is played by Cannon Wood. How did the audition process go? What was your process with that?
Yeah, this was the big challenge. So the first step was I brought on board this casting director. Her name is Danielle Pretzfelder-Demchek, and she very much focuses and specializes on casting underrepresented communities, neurodivergent kids particularly. And yeah, so I brought her on board and I said, how do we do this? And she said, you're looking to shoot this in LA, but I don't know that we're going to find this kid in LA. Maybe we will, maybe we won't. We should do a nationwide search across the United States. So she started reaching out to agents and managers, but also to Facebook groups of various parents of kids, you know, kind of in the neurodivergent space. And we set up an audition with kids truly scattered all over the country. Some were in California, some were elsewhere. Cannon was in Ohio, you know, in the middle of the country. Closer actually probably to you there in Quebec than to LA, honestly. And in the film, which is true to Derek's life as a child, is he didn't speak much. You know, he was pretty nonverbal. At points he started to repeat what others would say, but he didn't really start speaking until he was much older. Mm-hmm. And so for me, I always understood that this role, it's less about delivering lines, because he literally has one word he says in the entire story, and more about capturing the mannerisms and the behaviors and all of that. So we did auditions over Zoom, and a lot of it was me just feeding these different actors prompts of like, can you do this? Can you do that? And also seeing, when I would give them direction, how much could they change on the fly? And Cannon, who really didn't have much acting experience, there was something about him where he just got it. Like there was like such an authenticity to it, and he took direction extremely well. And his mom was also very invested in the process. One of the big challenges, in addition to everything else, was Cannon had never played piano before in his life. Mm. And obviously it's a very, very intensive piano role. And we did a lot of stuff in the film with using piano doubles and whatnot, but we needed him to be able to be comfortable with the piano and do some basic things. So his mom was able to get him piano lessons locally. His grandmother at her house had an old piano where he got to practice, and he even got to Zoom with Adam in England, and Adam got to work with him a little bit to get him more comfortable for using the keys. And so there was a lot there. But yeah, we really lucked out finding him. He's just such an incredible kid.
Well, it's great that you were working with a casting director who's specifically like to, you know, bring some awareness with neurodivergent people. About a year ago, I responded to someone who was looking for a videographer, because I do video for work as a living. And I met someone who I cannot call my friend, and he's autistic. He has a Tourette syndrome, and has interviewed a lot of celebrities here in Quebec. And it hasn't been easy for him growing up, you know, getting bullied, being told he cannot do certain things. And I'm very much inspired by his progress and his determination. So was it important for you to bring awareness to this cause as well?
Of course. Yeah. I mean, the way I've always felt about this story is in some way, it's almost like an underdog sports movie where Derek was a child where his family didn't really know what to do with him. They didn't know what kind of future he would have. And along came this teacher that saw something in this boy. And one of the things that I love about this story so much is there have been a lot of movies and shows done about savants, right? Somebody that has these incredible gifts, and it almost seems like they're born with these things. What I don't love about that is it shortchanges the amount of work that usually goes into these cases. And that's extremely true with Derek. Certainly, he has an incredible ear, an incredible memory, and an incredible ability. But it took the right combination of teacher and student and teacher to get him to be performing with orchestras around the world. Like I don't, that didn't just happen overnight. And so I think there's a lot there that's really important from like an awareness perspective of what's potentially possible. And every case is going to be different. Like not every kid is going to be like Derek. There's going to be, you know, it is truly a spectrum. But it shows what is possible. And the other piece of it that I think is, for me, is so important that I hope people walk away with when they watch this film is, we all take for granted that we communicate by speaking, right? Like we're talking using words here. For certain people that are, perhaps a little bit more neurodivergent like Derek, speaking with words is not necessarily their language, right? And in his case, it's music. There was a girl that I worked with, an autistic girl, when I was in college, in the beginning of college, who also was quite nonverbal. Her parents had a lot of difficulty communicating with her. And years later, she somehow started to express all of her inner thoughts through poetry, through written poetry. And nobody could even believe it, because nobody thought she could even write. But like all of a sudden she was writing these poems, and all these feelings that were inside were coming out through poems. That was her language. So this idea that perhaps there are people out there that don't necessarily communicate via the normal channels that we all think of, but communicate in their own way, that for me is, such a important part of this, and what I hope this film raises the awareness.
Yeah, and I really love what you mentioned about the fact that in some movies it's almost as if like it was an inner thing, that they were born with it and it's a special gift and it just come naturally, but there's some work that need to be put behind. So you talk about the teaching, that's something that's very like important in your short film. I do some teaching on Saturdays. I teach theater improvisation to children from 7 to 14. It's not always easy. Currently, one of the older one, he has trouble integrating, in the group. So how do you feel about children growing up with certain differences and how we should approach that as a teacher?
Yeah, I mean, I think like your example, or like the example with Adam, so much of it is, I think it's helpful to meet students where they are, right? Instead of forcing them to come to where you are to some preset standard, it's helpful to understand, how do they communicate? What kind of needs do they have? And how can you meet them there to communicate with them that way, or to bring out certain things? And, like you said, like every case will be different, but I think there's a tremendous opportunity there, honestly, for people that are open for looking for those different channels and places and ways to meet people where they are.
Yeah, it's not an easy thing sometimes. You don't know necessarily how you have to, the approach you have to take. You also want to make sure they kind of fit into the group. So there's a lot of things I'm struggling a bit with that. So I love the fact that it was something that was kind of like displayed in your short film. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That sounds like a great class, by the way.
Yeah, it's actually, we have a lot of fun. Some of them, I had no teaching experience, but I did that in last May, and some of them, they came back for this class and they love me. We have a lot of fun, but sometimes it's difficult because you want to integrate everyone. 7 to 14, it's kind of like a wide range. Yeah, it's a wide range. But we have a lot of fun. But also, I want to talk a little bit on the technical level. It was superb. I love the point of view of Derek from the sound, the sound design and the cinematography. So what was your collaboration with the team with that on that level?
So I have a wonderful experience with the DP of the short, Ed Wu, who I've worked with before. I worked with him on a series of like a horror TV series where I was producing, but I met him that way and just saw that he had a remarkable eye for things. From the very early days when we started working together, for me it was so important to try to put the audience into Derek's point of view. Of course, understanding we can never fully do it. He's blind, right? So we're not just going to make a movie without any visuals, right? But how do you get that feeling of being in his shoes, and most importantly, how he hears the world? And this was one of the, going back to your question about research, when I was meeting with Adam and Derek, one of the things that Adam said that was so profound to me and such a aha moment was, he said with children like Derek, that are autistic, neurodivergent, whatever you want to call it, there's sometimes this feeling that they are less sensory aware of what's going on with them, but in fact is the opposite. So if you're sitting with Derek, for example, in a cafe, he's hearing everything. He's hearing our conversation. He's hearing all the conversations around him. He's hearing the coffee machine making the espresso. He's hearing cars outside. He's hearing everything all at once. And that can both be extremely overwhelming, which explains that part of it. But at the same time, it also explains that if you can focus all of that, it's almost like a superhero ability. It's almost like a superpower. This like he can hear things like nobody else. So for me, I was like, how do we capture that in the film? You know, how do we get that feeling? So yeah, we put the camera very close to Canon at times, where like very, very shallow depth of field, like very much like almost everything out of focus except for just like a little bit. And then the sound goes to this place where everything is just amplified in a way. So it gives you at least that feeling. Like, of course, we'll never be able to fully experience things exactly as Derek, but at least it gives us that feeling of what it might be like to be in his perspective.
No, but for the first few shots, it felt very like authentic. I really loved the way it was portrayed, kind of like abstract in some way, and leaving like place to interpretation. I really love the way it was portrayed. You talk about the superhero ability. I mentioned my friend earlier, Matthew. So we have the same name, but sometimes when I start talking, he thinks he's like, you're talking too loud, and he has no filter. He would just like tell me like,
right,
you're talking very loud right now. You're talking too fast. So he's like, he has no filter, but I love that about him. Like that he has that certain senses that we don't necessarily have. So I feel like it was beautifully portrayed in Key of Genius.
I appreciate that. Yeah, it's like sometimes we think it's sensory deprivation, and I think it's the exact opposite. It's almost like sensory overload, but it also helps explain the incredible abilities.
Yeah, so I'm curious, are there some films or books, except the book you adapted, that inspire you to do Key of Genius?
Yeah, so as a musician, there have been some music-focused films that I absolutely love, where to me it feels like they capture the music authentically. Whiplash is a great example of that. That felt so raw and real and like in the jazz world. And Damien Chazelle, who directed it, is a jazz-trained drummer, so he brought that to the table. That for me has always been like a great inspiration point. And like that film also has just a very visceral feel of being in the music, like you're in there, like you're in there with all the instruments, the musicians. So that certainly was one. Growing up, I loved the movie Rain Man. What's interesting about that movie is tied to Derek's history. You know, Derek was born in 1979, and in the 80s when he was growing up, people weren't really talking about autism in the way that we talk about it now. And because he was both blind and autistic, and nobody was talking about autism, it actually took his parents a long time to understand that was what was going on with him. They just thought, oh, he was blind, so maybe he's not learning stuff like some other kids because he's blind. They had no idea. Rain Man, which I do love that movie, really got the conversation going in a very meaningful way about autism, in a way that I think it would have just taken much longer for people to start talking about it. So yeah, I think those movies, and then the David Sadler movie King's Speech, in the way that there's like a teacher-student relationship there. There's a class disparity between the teacher and the student. There it's flipped, where actually no, it's the same thing. It's the blue-collar teacher with the aristocratic student. Yeah, so it's actually the same class disparity issue. And yeah, that same idea of the tremendous amount of work it takes to finesse it. And it's not a disability that ever goes away, but it's brought to a different place.
Yeah, it's so nice that you have to work with him. Like, it must have been an honor for you. So, I mean, I was gonna ask you. I always ask the same question: what's next for Daniel? Are you working on something? But I kind of feel like you're cooking something with maybe a full feature-length film adaptation of The Key of Genius. Yeah.
So this is one where the feature script existed first, and then the short was made both as a standalone short and as a proof of concept for the feature. And the good news is, with all the momentum we've had from the short and playing at, a number of wonderful Oscar qualifying festivals in the United States and in England and all around the world, it's gotten the attention of several film financiers. We're in the process of putting the feature together. Hopefully, we'll be shooting in the spring of next year. That's the target right now. We're moving towards that. And for me, making the short, in addition to just like I'm very proud of it, and I love the way that it turned out. It was actually a very useful piece of R&D for the feature, of like, how do you cast this? How do you work with an actor like this? How do you deal with the music piece of it to really do it right? So I'm excited about being able to, expand this into the bigger thing.
Yeah, it's kind of like trying out what works, what doesn't work, and how you work with everyone on the set and everything, because it kind of like there's a big team. You got first AD, second AD, production designer, so you need to like find a way to collaborate with all of them, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, that's perfect. I wish you all the best for the festival run. Fingers crossed for Oscar nomination. We'll see if
I
that turns
appreciate
out.
that. Yeah, fingers
Yeah,
crossed indeed. Thank you. Yeah.
yeah. Wish you all the best, Daniel, and I'll keep an eye on what's going on after that. Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah.
Have a good one, Daniel. Thanks.
Awesome to meet you. Thanks.
Thanks.